Lawrence Bittaker, Roy Norris, The Toolbox Killers, 1979 California, The Pact Behind Bars. Hit that subscribe button before we begin, because this story isn't just about killers. It's about how evil can form when two minds find each other in the darkest place imaginable. It started in San Luis Obispo, California, inside the walls of the Caddo, California Men's Colony Prison, 1977. A place that held everything from car thieves to murderers, men who had long forgotten what sunlight and freedom felt like. Among them were Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, two inmates who, at first glance, didn't seem extraordinary. Bittaker, a quiet, calculating man in his late 30s, was known for his intelligence. He read law books, helped other inmates with appeals, and rarely raised his voice. Norris, a few years younger, had a different energy, impulsive, unpredictable, but deeply drawn to those who exuded control. They met in the prison workshop, surrounded by the metallic hum of machinery. What began as idle conversation, complaints about guards, stories about old crimes, quickly evolved into something darker. They realized they shared more than a cell block. They shared curiosity, a fascination with what people feared most. To the guards, they were just two inmates talking, but behind that ordinary chatter, they were building something dangerous: trust. Over the months, their conversations grew more graphic, their fantasies more elaborate. Other inmates began to avoid them. They called Bittaker the mechanic for his methodical nature, and Norris the mouth for his nervous laughter. Together, they were unpredictable, a combination of intelligence and recklessness. When both men were paroled, Norris first in hot 1978 and Bittaker a few months later, it should have been the end of their story, but instead, it was the beginning of a partnership that would soon terrify California. Outside prison walls, Bittaker seemed like a model ex-con. He got a job as a machinist in White Torrance, lived quietly in a small motel, and kept to himself. Norris, meanwhile, drifted through odd jobs, spending most of his time hanging out in bars near Redondo Beach. When they reunited, it was as if they had never left that workshop. They picked up right where they had left off, planning, talking, and imagining what they could do now that there were no walls between them. They spent weekends driving through the San Gabriel Mountains, scouting locations. The quiet, twisting roads became their hunting grounds. They claimed it was just for photography, but they weren't taking pictures of sunsets. They were studying isolation. They were looking for places no one could hear a scream. To the people around them, they were unremarkable. Just two middle-aged men in a beat-up silver van. They called it Murder Mac, but at that time, nobody knew. They began testing boundaries, approaching strangers, taking photos, talking about who might be easy to approach. Their conversations had become a shared obsession, and once it started, it didn't stop. But every killer leaves traces, and in 1979, California was on high alert. The hot Hillside Strangler case had just shocked Los Angeles, and the LAPD was watching for patterns, missing women, anything that might signal another predator on the loose. At first, no one connected the disappearances. The victims were young, often hitchhiking or walking alone, girls the system overlooked. Then, that summer, things escalated. June 1979. A missing persons report came in from Redondo Beach. A teenage girl who'd vanished on her way home from a job interview. A week later, another young woman disappeared from Hermosa Beach. Then another from Mount San Fernando Valley. The cases were filed separately, but one detail stood out. Witnesses kept describing the same thing: a kissed and gray or silver van seen in the area. Detectives didn't have much. No plate number, no faces, just a vehicle. Still, It was enough to start asking questions. But while police were struggling to connect the dots, Bittaker and Norris were getting bolder. They had found a routine, a system. They cruised beaches in daylight, pretending to hand out flyers or ask for directions. Their targets were always the same: young women alone, trusting, or simply unlucky enough to cross their path. To outsiders, they looked harmless. One of them always smiled, the other rarely spoke. And that combination, charm and silence, was disarming. Their friendship, once forged in concrete and steel, had become something monstrous. Each man pushed the other further. Where one hesitated, the other encouraged. Where one grew afraid, the other reminded him of their agreement. They saw themselves as partners in power, two sides of the same coin. By late summer, the pattern had become deadly clear. Disappearances were increasing, and police departments across Southern California were under pressure. Every missing poster, every worried parent, every late-night phone call seemed to echo the same fear. There was someone out there, and no one knew who. One of the most telling moments came in September 1979, when Bittaker and Norris made a mistake that would later seal their fate. They picked up a girl near Sunland Tujunga, a quiet area nestled near the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains. But this time, something went wrong. A witness, a neighbor walking his dog, saw the van. He remembered the make, the partial license plate, even the strange dents along the bumper. He called it in, saying the men inside didn't look right. At first, the report went unnoticed. California had hundreds of vans like it. But months later, when everything came to light, that one phone call would become a key detail in the case against them. For now, the pair continued undetected. And the more they got away with, the more confident they became. They spent their nights driving through mountain roads with the windows rolled down, the sound of the wind masking their conversations. They talked about control, power, and what people feared most. It wasn't about money, or revenge, or even thrill. It was about domination. And as the nights stretched on, their crimes grew darker. In October, they disappeared for almost a week, returning to Torrance looking tired but exhilarated. When Norris asked what Bittaker thought of their latest project, he simply replied, "Perfected." By Temps, November 1979. The missing persons list in Southern California had grown long enough to draw media attention. News anchors mentioned it briefly. The rising number of disappearances, the growing sense of unease. But no one had yet connected all the dots. Not yet. Because it wasn't until a terrified young woman came forward, one who had survived, that investigators would finally learn the truth about the two men from prison. Her statement would unravel one of the most chilling cases in California's criminal history. But before she spoke, there was one final discovery, something that turned a pattern of disappearances into undeniable horror. Hiker. Exploring a quiet canyon in the San Gabriel Mountains, stumbled upon something half buried in the dirt. A small piece of evidence that would link every missing person to the same two men. And when investigators arrived, what they uncovered would send shockwaves through every precinct in Los Angeles. The van of nightmares. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button, because what's about to unfold next will change the way you look at trust, strangers, and the quiet roads of California forever. The discovery in the San Gabriel Mountains didn't make headlines at first. To most, it looked like another piece of litter on the rugged hillside, a fragment of clothing, a broken charm, a trace of something long forgotten. But to the detectives who arrived at the scene that day, it was a whisper of horror. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The item, a small silver earring, shaped like a heart, matched one reported missing by the parents of a girl named Andrea Hall, who had disappeared that summer while hitchhiking from Redondo Beach. Her case had gone cold months earlier, like so many others. But now, a connection was forming, and it all pointed towards something bigger. The same region, the same missing women, the same eerie descriptions of a kit gray van that seemed to appear and vanish across multiple counties. To the LAPD and the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, it was a lead they couldn't ignore. They began cross-referencing reports, mapping the disappearances, and comparing the details. And that's when it clicked. Every missing girl had last been seen within the same radius, within an hour's drive of Torrance, California. Meanwhile, in a small apartment near Del Amo Boulevard, Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris were celebrating. The walls were lined with cassette tapes, Polaroids, and mechanical tools. The air smelled of oil and cigarette smoke. To anyone else, it would look like a cluttered garage workspace. But to detectives, months later, it would be one of the most disturbing scenes in California's criminal history. By late 1979, the two men had turned their van, their so-called Murder Mac, into something out of a nightmare. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a stage. The inside was stripped down and reinforced with steel hooks, handcuffs, and insulation to block sound. To anyone driving by, it was just another old van rumbling through California's coastal highways. But inside, something unthinkable was happening. Bittaker was the planner, methodical, unemotional, obsessed with detail. Norris was the follower, impulsive, volatile, but eager to impress. Together, they fed off each other's darkness. One pushing boundaries, the other was too afraid to test alone. They spent hours driving from Hermosa Beach to San Fernando Valley, pretending to be photographers looking for models. Sometimes they offered rides. Sometimes they asked for directions. Always, they looked harmless. The kind of men you'd pass on the street without a second thought. That was their power. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like men. But their control was starting to slip. Bittaker had grown overconfident, while Norris's nerves began to crack under the weight of their crimes. He started drinking more, talking too much in bars. One night, sitting at a booth in Burbank, he confided in a woman he barely knew, bragging, testing, trying to impress her with stories he thought no one would believe. But she believed enough to be afraid. She told her friend, who told a local deputy. And that single tip, dismissed at first as drunken nonsense, would later spark the investigation that brought everything crashing down. Meanwhile, detectives were tightening their net around Torrance. The same van, silver, dented with mismatched panels, had been spotted too many times near too many missing persons cases. They ran a database search for registered vans matching the description. One name popped up: Lawrence Bittaker, a recently paroled felon with a prior record and a job at a local machinist shop. A second search revealed his known associate, Roy Norris, another ex-convict released from the same prison. And just like that, everything clicked into place. Two men who met behind bars. Two men whose paths had converged through coincidence and fate. Two men who had built a friendship out of shared obsession, now suspected of turning that obsession into something deadly. Detectives from the Torrance Police Department and the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office began their surveillance quietly. They followed the men from work to bars, from diners to back roads. They noted patterns: the van's frequent trips into the mountains, the long nights spent driving without purpose, the strange pauses near beaches and schools. But without hard evidence, they couldn't move. They needed someone who could talk, someone close enough to know the truth. That's when they found her. Shirley Sanders, a young woman who had encountered the two men months earlier and survived. She had been hitchhiking when they offered her a ride. At first, they were polite, too polite. But something about the way the driver kept glancing in the mirror made her uneasy. When the van slowed on a remote stretch near San Fernando, she panicked. She bolted out the passenger side door and ran into traffic, waving frantically at oncoming cars. She didn't know it then, but that desperate escape would later save countless lives. When detectives tracked her down and showed her a photo lineup, she pointed immediately. "That's them," she said. "Those are the men in the van." Now they had a witness. On November 20th, 1979, the investigation reached its breaking point. Detectives moved in on Roy Norris, arresting him outside his apartment in Redondo Beach. At first he laughed, nervous, confident, almost mocking. But when he was placed in an interrogation room, the laughter stopped. For hours, he denied everything. Then, as the detectives began describing what they'd found in the mountains, the evidence, the missing girls, the van, his face went pale. He realized they knew too much. And in that moment, he broke. Norris confessed. He told them about the van, about Bittaker, about the months of stalking and planning. He told them how they had used their time in prison to design their crimes, even down to the tools they would use. He told them where to look. By the time the interview ended, investigators had enough to arrest Bittaker. When they entered his workplace, the machinist barely looked surprised. He just stared at the officers and said, "Guess you've been expecting me." Inside his apartment, police found hundreds of photographs, lists of names, and detailed notes describing the abductions. It was worse than anyone had imagined. A level of planning and cruelty that left even veteran detectives shaken. But the most chilling discovery came from the van itself. Parked quietly in a Torrance lot, the silver vehicle held more than just tools. Inside were personal items belonging to missing women, scraps of tape, and a collection of cassette recordings. Those tapes, later sealed as evidence, would reveal just how far Bittaker and Norris had gone. As detectives stepped out of the van that night, the air was thick with silence. The wind carried the faint hum of traffic from the highway below, but it felt distant, unreal. What they'd uncovered wasn't just a string of crimes. It was a roadmap into the minds of two men who had turned friendship into a factory of fear. And for the prosecutors preparing the case, one question lingered. How do you punish two people who saw their crimes not as acts of evil, but as proof of their partnership? The Trial of Monsters. Before we finish, make sure you subscribe, because this ending will leave you questioning how two men could turn their own friendship into a pact darker than anything California had ever seen. It was beyond 1980, and the case of Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris had exploded into national headlines. The media called them the Toolbox Killers. The name alone was enough to send shivers down the spines of those following the trial, a label that captured not just the horror of their crimes, but the cold calculation behind them. For detectives and prosecutors, this wasn't just another case. It was personal. The evidence they had uncovered inside that van had haunted them. The Polaroids, the lists, the notebooks, all meticulously cataloged and organized. Each piece of paper felt like a trophy, a symbol of dominance, and sitting in the courtroom, watching the proceedings unfold. Lawrence Bittaker was calm, too calm. He took notes, whispered to his attorney, even smiled at times. Roy Norris, on the other hand, avoided eye contact with everyone. He had already made a deal, testifying against Bittaker in exchange for life imprisonment instead of the death penalty. It was a betrayal that stunned even Bittaker, who had once called Norris his brother in mind. Now, his closest accomplice was the prosecution's star witness. In the packed Los Angeles courtroom, the air was thick with unease. Reporters filled every row, sketch artists' pencils scraping quietly as the testimonies began. One by one, The detectives took the stand, describing what they had found: the photographs, the lists of victims, and the van that had become a symbol of fear. When Norris took the stand, the room fell silent. His voice was trembling but clear as he recounted the events: how they met in prison, how they planned their experiment, how they hunted for victims under the California sun. He described their partnership in chilling detail, how Bittaker was always in control, always composed, while he followed orders, too weak to stop. But to the jury, his remorse meant little. Every word he spoke painted an image of something so calculated, so inhuman, that the room felt colder with each passing minute. The prosecution focused on Bittaker's personality: intelligent, manipulative, and remorseless. He was the architect, the mind that had turned theory into execution. In his own writings, prosecutors found chilling reflections, philosophical musings about control, punishment, and the nature of fear. It was as though he saw people as experiments, not as lives. In one notebook he had written, "Power isn't in the act, it's in the planning, the knowledge that you can decide how it ends." Those words sealed his fate. The jury deliberated for only a few days. When they returned, the courtroom was silent enough to hear the rustling of paper as the foreman read the verdict: guilty on all counts. Bittaker showed no emotion as the judge sentenced him to death by gas chamber. He only asked one question: when? Roy Norris, meanwhile, was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. He would spend the rest of his days inside a cell, the same kind of cell where he once met the man who had changed everything. But even after the trial, the echoes of their crimes didn't fade. In the years that followed, investigators continued to receive letters from Bittaker, written in perfect cursive, cold and methodical. He never apologized. He never expressed regret. He claimed innocence, accused the system of corruption, and even filed appeals claiming his trial was unfair. Every time his name resurfaced, the victims' families had to relive their pain. For them, there was no closure, only survival. Meanwhile, Norris became a cautionary tale. He cooperated with the police, gave interviews, and tried to rationalize what had happened, blaming Bittaker's influence, the system, even fate. But deep down, he knew the truth. The evil hadn't been forced upon him. He had chosen it. Decades later, in 2019, Lawrence Bittaker died of natural causes on death row. No final words, no remorse, just silence. The same cold silence that had followed him since 1979. When the news broke, one of the retired detectives who had worked the case said something that summed it all up. Some people die once. Bittaker died the day he was caught. The rest was just waiting. The Toolbox Killers case changed how California approached violent parolees and prison rehabilitation. It forced lawmakers to question how two men, both previously incarcerated, Ted could have met inside a correctional facility and used that connection to become something far worse once released. It also exposed a harsh reality. Sometimes, prisons don't reform people. They unite them. And when that happens, the consequences can be unimaginable. Even today, criminologists still study the case, not for the brutality, but for the psychology behind it. Bittaker and Norris weren't driven by need or revenge. They were driven by motivation, curiosity, a twisted desire to see how far they could go when no one was watching. That, perhaps, was what made them so terrifying. They didn't see themselves as monsters. They saw themselves as explorers of the darkest parts of the human mind. Now, the roads they once traveled are quiet again. The San Gabriel Mountains rise against the California sky, their slopes serene and still. But for those who remember 1979, the silence carries a different weight. It's the silence of things that were buried, both in the ground and in history. The case of Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris remains one of the most haunting reminders of what happens when evil finds its reflection, when two broken minds recognize themselves in each other and decide to act. They were called the Toolbox Killers. But what they really built was a legacy of fear that California has never forgotten. A friendship forged in prison turned into a nightmare on the open road. If you think this story was dark, wait until you hear the next one. Another partnership that started with trust and ended in terror. Hit subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. Because the next case we're diving into will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about loyalty, justice, and the human mind. Stay safe, stay alert, and remember, evil doesn't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes it's sitting right next to you.